Okay, well, we're delighted to have you with us, and we hope this will be an informative and actually, as we say in the title, transformational seminar with you all. Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Goodwin. I'm President and CEO of Turning West. We're an organization development and leadership consulting firm based in Southern California, but with clients all across North America and Europe. Our company really specializes in organizational culture, and everything we do is centered around transforming culture, because as we know that if you have culture, you have great strategy and so forth. And we're going to talk about the relationship between culture and strategy today. But it really doesn't matter how wonderful your products or services are. If your culture is toxic or dysfunctional, you've got real serious problems and you're going to be suffering as a result. That's kind of the emphasis of our company. With me today is our managing consultant, Megan. Megan, you want to say a word about yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. As Dr. Goodwin said, my name is Megan Sands, and I have a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology and really enjoy the conversation and topic around human behavior in the workplace, and really excited to dive into strategy and culture. As Dr. Goodwin said, this is something that's a focus of our company and something we're excited to talk about.
Great. Yep. So let's dive in. So let me tell you a story to begin with. So several years ago, we were working with an organization in here at Los Angeles County, and they wanted a strategic plan. And of course, they've done these before, but they really resonated with our approach. They chose us to be their guides in developing their next strategic plan. And as we were going about this, of course, we helped them articulate and identify and re-identify their values, mission, and vision. And the next phase, as we went into their environmental scan, we were surveying the landscape around them and talking to other agencies in their competitive space and talking to people that they were influencing in the larger culture. And there's something powerful about that environmental scan process, where as outsiders, those folks would tell us the truth of how they really saw that organization. One of the things we learned from that scanning process was that folks outside of this organization saw this organization as the thought leaders in that field. In fact, what they said to us, every time we think about our field and who's advancing the field and who knows the most about this field, we think about this particular organization you're doing this scan for. When we went back and told that organization that this was how they were perceived, they were quite shocked by this. They had no idea this is how they were seen, as a real thought leader in this particular field of knowledge. And what happened then for them was really powerful. They began to go back and say, is this congruent with our values, our mission, and our vision? Answer was absolutely yes. And then it also influenced their culture in the sense of, they said, well, that we didn't really understand that we were having this effect on other organizations around us, the partners and the strategic organizations that we work with. Maybe we should lean into this. And so out of that learning that they gleaned from this, they chose as their strategy to be the thought leaders in that particular field over the next 3 years. And then all of their goals and areas of focus flowed out of that key strategy. It was a powerful moment for them. And over the next 3 years, before we led their next strategic planning process, that organization doubled in size. This is the power of strategy, but also the power of strategy connected with culture. But culture is a big word. In fact, in the field of human knowledge, it's often considered perhaps the biggest concept out there. Organizational culture is so many things, right? It's really deep and broad and wide. It's like the water the fish swims in, right? It's the whole environment that we live in. It's our styles of dress and our values and our unwritten rules, our symbols, our stories. Culture is absolutely huge. And culture is also strategy. One of the things you're going to hear us say back and forth, one of the mysteries of understanding organizational culture, is that culture works both ways, in both directions. So culture is strategy, and strategy influences culture. And there's influences back and forth. As you start to work on your culture, you're changing your culture, but your culture is always shaping and reshaping you. And it's a give and take, back and forth process all the time. Let's begin by defining culture a little bit more, shall we? So we like this next definition of culture, that culture is expansive, right? You saw that in that slide just a moment ago, that it's very wide and deep and broad. That culture is, well, it's hard to define. In fact, most people, when they try to define culture, what they're talking about is organizational climate. Oh, we're really hip and we got a pool table in the lobby and we got a soda machine and we all just hang out. It's like a coffee shop atmosphere, or we all wear suits and ties and to the office. That's climate, not culture. You can't not have a culture. It's inescapable. You will always have a culture. And it always goes back to the founding of that organization. And you will always be inescapably tied to that founding, for good or for bad. Culture is both visible, but it's largely invisible. We can see some elements of culture, like the physical layout of our office space, for example. But it's harder to see the beliefs and the taboos and the unwritten rules that exist in culture. But those are powerful shapers of our behavior every single day. Culture is constant and persistent. It will always exist. It will not cease to exist. And it goes on and on for decades and decades. Oftentimes we work with organizations that have been around 100 years, and you can look back and see the elements of that culture all the way back 100 years. It will persist over time. And like I mentioned earlier, culture is a tool that shapes us, and it's a tool that we use to shape our environment. It goes bi-directional, and it's layers upon layers upon layers. If you think about this like a Russian nesting doll, or perhaps if you're a photographer and you like to have a camera that zooms in and zooms out, I can zoom in and see the team culture, the organization culture, the culture of the community that we live in. I can see the United States culture. I can see Western culture, in and out, up and down, or all these layers of culture. So to try to define this a little bit more, Chalmers and Brannon have this to say. It's the mutual outlook, the assumptions, the standards of an organization's membership. And all of this is shaped by our beliefs, our values, mission, and vision. These are foundational elements, these three. Our behaviors are affected and affect culture back and forth. Our expectations, our patterns of communication, and so much more. Culture is really, really big. Now, when it comes to culture and strategy, of course, everyone knows about the famous Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker, died maybe 15, 20 years ago or so. Management guru extraordinaire all around the world, taught at Claremont University, not far from where I sit here in the moment in Southern California. And Drucker's famous statement was, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." No doubt you've heard this comment. I've yet to meet anyone who disagrees with it. However, I rarely meet anyone who understands how to implement it, or what it actually means, or how to influence strategy and culture and strategy. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about that and try to help you understand this and unpack this a little bit more, so that if you're thinking about or ready to do your next strategic plan, you make sure that it's deeply integrated and anchored in your culture, and you understand the influence between the two. One of my favorite old poems, John Godfrey Saxe from the 19th century, is an old poem, Six Blind Men of Indistan. If you ever want to go look that up, it's a fun little poem. It's an old tale. It's told many times, and he just happened to put it in a rhyming poem in the 19th century. But the Sufi tale talks about six blind men walking up to an elephant and trying to describe what they saw or what they experienced. And each describes a part of that, but not the whole. One walks up to the side, and it feels like a wall to him. One grabs the tusk out in front, and he says, "Oh, I understand. An elephant's like a spear." One grabs the trunk and says, "Oh, an elephant's like a snake." One grabs the ear and says, "Oh, the elephant's like a fan." The next one grabs the leg and said, "Oh, an elephant's like a tree." And the last one grabs the tail and said, "Oh, I understand. An elephant's like a rope." Now, each of them are partly right and partly wrong. And that's often what happens when we think about culture. Because culture is so difficult to get a handle on, it helps to kind of is to try to tackle and shape our culture. It helps to have an entry point, a place to start. And your strategic planning process can be just that. So for example, if you find yourself with a culture that's a little stuffy and out of date, and the culture is just not moving, and you've got, well, it's a little complacent, or perhaps it's even dysfunctional, or it's perhaps even toxic, to try to influence that, you might start with influencing the culture and its strategy and strategic planning process. This happens to us a lot at Turning West. We often get called in to do a lot of strategic planning across the country for organizations large and small, for-profit, nonprofit, and government sectors as well. And when we do a strategic planning process, what sets us apart is we're always thinking about the influence on the culture and the culture's influence on the strategy and the strategic plan, because separate those two is a failure always. So we're going to talk now about how we go about that and how you can go about aligning your culture and your strategy so that you can be maximally successful in doing this. So what we see is strategy is an entry point into influencing your culture. A strategy or strategic plan that's not aligned with your organizational culture will always fail. I don't know why my slide's not quite coming up there. This was Drucker's point, right? If you don't anchor your strategic plan and your strategy in your culture and have the two of them talk to each other in an intentional, articulate way, your strategy will be worthless and your plan will be absolutely rubbish. It'll never get used, it won't work, and it will fail. However, if you're wise and you really want to influence your culture, strategy can be used as an entry point. This is one way over the next, let's say, 3 years. That's what most of our plans are, 3 years. This is a way we can influence and realign our culture, is by realigning our strategy and our culture and doing both at the same time. So culture influences strategy, strategy influences culture. Megan, you want to say a little bit more about this, about strategy?
Yeah, so now that we've taken some time to define culture a little bit, we also want to be really specific in what we mean by strategy as well. Often we think we know what strategy is when we go into a strategic planning process, but we think it's really helpful to, as a first step, to consider what we mean by strategy. Are we trying to create a plan? Are we looking for a pattern? Are we defining our position or our perspective? Often when we go through strategic planning processes, our clients and people that we're working with might have different definitions of what they mean by strategy. And this conversation is really important to determine if we're creating a plan, what that plan needs to look like, or the other specific aspects here. And really the goal here is to identify what is it that we're really trying to accomplish in this process. And often it is a specific plan with a number of these different pieces involved. And we actually, often our clients might not come up with this as the main reason for doing the plan, but we often argue that the most valuable part of strategic planning is really the alignment of your people and those that are involved in the process. So when we do strategic planning, we involve a lot of different employees, a lot of different staff, in order to really create a shared mental model of how the organization functions, how it works, how it collaborates with people within and outside of it. And so there's a number of different things that are happening in this strategic planning process. And so starting with this question is really valuable with our clients.
I love that, Megan, because, Professor Henry Mintzberg says that one of the first places that people begin to fail in strategic planning is they think they know what it is, but they don't actually define what it is that they're doing. What we're actually trying to accomplish. And what we're saying here is we want you to think that through at the very beginning of your strategic planning process. What is this thing that we're doing, and what is strategy? Talk a little bit more about that, would you?
Yeah, so we'll offer our specific definition of strategy. Well, not ours, but one we like to use from Michael Porter, that strategy is the creation of a unique and valuable position involving a different set of activities. So Michael Porter really emphasizes that strategy is a position and a perspective. And he differentiates this from your typical operational effectiveness. So your daily activities and your daily operations are not your strategy. And often this is a moment of teaching and challenge with our clients as well, that when we're creating a strategic plan, we're not just writing down the activities that we're already going to be doing in the future. We're really trying to set direction and set a specific destination that we're trying to head, and something specific we're trying to accomplish. And this involves a position and perspective, as I shared from Michael Porter's perspective and research here. He specifies that a unique position in the marketplace is really important when you're doing strategic planning, that you recognize where you are, what your position is in the market, that you might want to be a low-cost airline, or a specific position in your marketplace. And then following up to that, your perspective is specifically how you will win in this marketplace. So you want to understand where you position yourself, what you position yourself as, and then how you're going to really accomplish that. And overall, another theme that we're really going to be emphasizing in today's webinar is the thinking about the future and continuous improvement as we're going through strategic planning. So part of this process is really about anticipating and preparing for the future rather than reacting to the present or the past. And so really thinking ahead and having that forward-thinking mindset in order to inform this strategy. Some specifics in Michael Porter's research that we really emphasize as well is that strategy requires trade-offs. So we can't do everything or provide every service to everyone around us. We have to be very specific based on our position and our perspective that we've defined, what the activities and the goals ought to look like. And at the root of this,
so Megan, Porter was talking a lot about for-profits, but how does this apply to a nonprofit? I know some of our listeners are probably thinking about that in terms of the nonprofit sector application of this.
So we would argue that even though you're not selling goods in the same way that a for-profit would, that we would connect these ideas directly in the nonprofit sector as well, and that the last point here of customer-centric, it might be client or those that you're servicing that are at the center of this. And the trade-off specifically in a nonprofit I think nonprofits fall into the category of trying to be everything to everyone, maybe a little bit more often as well. And so specifying which services are really going to be valuable for your position and perspective, which services and programs are really pushing you towards a specific direction and strategy.
I love that. That's great. Fantastic.
And we will continue now talking about strategy and some of this anticipation and kind of back and forth. And we liken this process to playing chess. So if you've played chess before, you know that when you're playing chess, you're thinking through different parts of the game and you're thinking steps ahead of your opponent and even your own moves. And so we posit that in strategic planning, you also need to be thinking ahead and really recognize that your success really depends on your ability to predict and anticipate what's going to happen in the future, while also having an adaptability to respond to the environment. We can't predict every single change or every shift in the market, but being prepared to have an agile and dynamic approach where you're assessing the market and you're planning for where you could pivot to respond to those changes in the market as well. And so we think of most strategic plans, as Dr. Goodwin said, are about 3 years. And so you're thinking about your strategic plan almost in this opening, middle game, and end game in the same way that you would chess. What are the steps we need to take at the beginning, in the middle, and then at the end of those 3 years? And in addition to this, we also liken this process to in chess, you're winning by having a strong positional advantage, right? And so we're applying the same concept to strategic planning, that you're creating and maintaining a strategic position to create a competitive advantage or to tackle a specific challenge. And this will help you in your organization and in this process. And overall, again, really emphasizing that a strategic planning process is something that's ongoing. It's something that we would argue the plan, even if it's a final plan and a final document, it's really dynamic and something that should be continuously evolving and be evaluated, rather than being a stagnant thing. It's really something that it requires reevaluation, and again, that dynamic relationship with your marketplace, your industry, or if you're a nonprofit, your community that you're serving, really seeing how the community is reacting to you and what their specific needs are.
Well, I love that last point, Megan, because one of the things we're seeing with our clients is they're often asking us, could we come back quarterly or semi-annually to help them evaluate their progress toward their strategic plan? And they're asking us and saying, it's something that we had actually thought of, but they've been continually asking us. That'd be really helpful to us to have an outside thinker come and help us ask these deep questions. Are we getting where we wanted to go, right? And that's that dynamic piece of moving like a chess player, and your opponent moves, and then you move differently and you change up your strategy as you go along. Really powerful.
Yeah, and it's helpful. You're kind of marrying that long-term perspective and long-term thinking with the current reality and the progress you've made on specific goals in that process. So yeah, coming back quarterly and checking in with staff is a really cool way for us to continue to guide the process and for the client to have some accountability for that plan, not just sitting in the background, but actually being something that they're interacting and working with frequently. One more just to add to our list of metaphors here today. Another one we like to really focus on, and this is important because at the root of strategic planning, we would say is your culture, as we've already described. And one piece of your culture is your vision. So your ideal future that you're trying to really get to as an organization. And we talk about vision as a landscape, something that's really stretching out before you. It's far away. And this is like in this picture here, you have a distant horizon that represents your ultimate destination. So our vision for the future that we eventually want to get to. And all of our activities should be aligned with this specific direction. And this is where sometimes strategic planning can be so valuable, because we start by revising and looking at that vision statement. Do we have a clear picture of where we want to go? And then how do we align ourselves to that? So if we're looking at this, we see that vision is really an aspirational thing, something that's pulling you in. But your strategic planning process kind of makes this big picture idea something that's really tangible and specific. And so your goals that we have represented across here in the foreground and the midpoint really are aligned with this compass and this final direction that you're headed. And so we're in our strategic planning process, we're helping you to come up with what the specific goals are that are leading you to that vision. And really, again, trying to make sure that this takes something like a stagnant vision statement and really gives you a specific way to transform your organization and really move in that direction.
And one of the things we see often is organizations will say, our vision is we're going to be the greatest organization in our industry, or something like some inside baseball like that. And we frankly just go, yawn. No one cares about that. Your vision should be, what difference are you going to make in the world? What are people going to experience? That's what gets your consumers, your beneficiaries of your program, and your employees excited about getting up and going to work every day, is that vision. That's a huge piece of your culture. But if your vision, again, is inside baseball, we just want to be the greatest manufacturing company in our industry, no one cares. Not even your employees really care about that. The owner does maybe, but that's not going to motivate people. So your culture needs adjustment there. That's our point here that we're trying to make. And that's where your strategic planning process can go back and influence your culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think it's interesting. Often we do hear that our vision is just to be the best in our marketplace, and that might be a good goal and something to inform your strategy and your position and other things we're talking about. But your vision should really be something that's inspirational and speaks directly to the people that are benefiting from your organization's work. And so that's a fun part of our process when we get to step in and talk to teams about their vision. And to get even more specific here, talking about our strategic planning process that we follow at Turning West, we have a diagram here that starts to outline a little bit about how we go about this. So we've talked about the importance of culture, we've defined strategy, and now this is how Turning West really approaches it. So we start by asking the question to our clients, who are we? And this really is the culture, trying to understand who we are, what our values are, what our mission is, what our vision is, and starting with that foundation of organizational culture, because as we've said already, your culture and your strategy need to be in alignment for your strategy to really be effective. And so we start with an assessment of that culture. Then we go a little bit outside of the organization and start to look at the environment. So what's the context? What is in the marketplace that's surrounding this organization? And in this environmental scan process is when we're really making sure to have a lot of employee involvement and really asking questions about what's going on in the environment. What are some, this is where we do a SWOT analysis, understanding strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in the organization, and a number of different things to really understand where we are currently and where we can go in the future. And involving a lot of employees and getting a lot of voice from staff helps us so that they feel that they've contributed directly to this plan, and therefore have more buy-in, and they're aware and part of the process. They're not just being presented a strategic plan once we're at the end. The third step here is really looking at what our vision is, what our preferred future is, and marrying kind of where we are and where we want to be in both contexts there. And then we get specific into what is our strategy. We really try to help our clients come up with a specific strategy statement that really describes that position and perspective. Then we group different buckets of activities into areas of focus, and then have specific goals and objectives kind of in a funnel of a number of different levels of specificity there, so that really throughout all of this, the culture and the strategy, again, are being assessed and aligned and talked about throughout the process.
Yeah, so those are the four big movements of the process, and this is strategic planning going back 100 years or so. This is lots of thinkers and academicians have come up with this. This isn't original to us by any means, but let me just dive in a little bit more into each of these in the next context of who we are. See, this is really a culture question. This is an identity question. Your values is your identity, and your vision is your destiny. We like to think about those two compass points, and strategy is that pathway between those two. And so you have to really understand, be able to articulate your values and who you are, because your values have been set. Whether you can articulate them or not, they do exist. And if they're out of alignment with other things that your behavior and your strategy and other things, those values, those operant hidden values, are going to shape your culture and pull you backwards. And that's where culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's exactly what Peter Drucker was trying to say. So the process really begins by knowing who you are, right? And those deep philosophical questionings about what are our values from the beginning. Can we articulate them and find the 4 to 7 or so key core things at the very heart of who we are? And then we like to identify other values that are just important to us as an organization, the organizations we work with, to understand what that is. What's our mission? What business are we in? So we don't experience, especially in the nonprofit sector, what we call mission drift. And where have we been? Where has our history been? All these things are super important. Then in our context, the environmental scan piece, who are our stakeholders? What are they saying about us? What shifts are happening in the larger culture beyond us, our regional or statewide or national culture? What's happening there? The world is always moving and not staying stagnant here, so this affects us. What are the trends in our industry do we need to know about? What's happening in the neighborhood or in leadership in general? Or these are the things that too often organizations don't take stock of, because they have to react and they have to become agile as chess players in their field, and they have to know this. one of the things that we often struggle with when clients engage us in particular is they want to short circuit this part of the process. And we see this often, right, Megan? They just want to go, don't do very much. We won't hear very much different. But almost always when we do an environmental scan of outside stakeholders, strategic partners, people in the neighborhood and city hall, we hear things that are very informative to the strategic process. And so doing a little bit broader scan of our context is super, super helpful. So we encourage you, don't short circuit that process. It's worth everything you put invested in that. Then again, our vision. Where are we going? This is so important to get this right. And as Megan said earlier, it should be emotionally compelling. It should make our people excited. It should get them out of bed. When we did this for one organization some years ago, they developed this beautiful statement, one sentence, very easy to memorize. And a couple weeks later, the leader was walking through the cubicle land of their offices, and she saw one of her colleagues had a beautiful wooden plaque hand painted with this vision statement on it. And the leader stopped and said, "Well, where did you get that?" She says, "Oh my goodness, I'm so moved by this vision statement. I had my artist friend create this for me." And the leader was wise enough to say, "Can you give me her name?" And she went and engaged that artist to produce one for everyone on the team, right? This is the power of vision. If you have something like that happen, then you know you've got the right vision. If it gets your people out of bed in the morning and says, "I can't wait to get out of bed and go do this tomorrow," then you know you've got a vision. And then your strategic plan over the next 3 years, to go back to that landscape horizon that Megan showed you a minute ago, should align and point to, should help us get towards that place. Then the key core thing at the heart of any strategic plan is the strategy itself. Unfortunately, 99 times out of 100, the strategic plans that we come across prior to clients that have done it without us, we find that it's just a plan. There's no strategy at the heart of this. There's no key core thing that says we're going to be the thought leader in our industry, or we are going to be a low-cost airline, or we're going to be the J.C. Penney of our neighborhood, or the Nordstrom of our marketplace, or what's the strategy that's going to align the vision and the culture and get us there. And then that should be clearly followed up with areas of focus. And I liked what Megan said earlier, is it can't be, as Michael Porter said, operational efficiency. It can't be just, we're going to do all the stuff we've always done. A strategic plan needs to take you someplace new, so that when you think about even that compass point of 3 years down the line, when the strategic plan has been completed, we want you to arrive someplace new. You want to be someplace new. So maybe that could be taking something we're already doing and doing it better. Maybe it could be adding something we've never done before. Maybe it could be a combination of the two. It's some way, but it's going to take you someplace. That's the difference from operational efficiencies to strategic planning. And we like the 1 to 3 year time frame. If you're doing a 5-year time frame, forget it. The world's changed too much in years 4 and 5. Even these days, with the world's moving so fast, 3 years is a stretch, but it can be a workable thing if you're evaluating it on a regular, at least yearly, if not semi-annually basis, and then being willing to dynamically readjust that. So to put this all together, how we always think about strategic planning is a diagram. A picture says 1,000 words, and this is our picture of how we describe strategic planning. So if your whole strategy here and your culture was a house, kind of this whole image here, at the foundation of that house are your values, your mission, and your vision. Anchoring your strategic plan on that foundation is going to be the key to success. And then doing that context piece, that environmental scan, and then that yellow bar is Michael Porter's strategy of position and perspective. And we encourage you to go back to Harvard Business Review and look up his, I think it was 1989 article, What is Strategy? It's their most reproduced article ever from HBR. Once you've got your strategy with your positioning and perspective, now and only now are you ready to go and find those buckets of goals and objectives that will come out of that it's the meat of the plan. But then we would add one last thing, this red bar across the top. Again, coming back to sandwiching culture, your strategic plan around culture, top and bottom. Who's going to own each of these items on the strat plan? Do we need to change any resources? We're going to allocate resources more here or less there, or change this. Are there going to be any staffing changes? Is there a change management plan that's needed, since we're going to be doing something new and we got to overcome resistance and defensiveness? How is this going to affect the evaluation? How often we're going to come back and look at this and dynamically change this? Now, all of this is anchoring into the culture. Too often, the reason strategic plans sit on a shelf and never get taken out is because they don't do this last piece. These last 6 items here to kind of top off the connection between culture and strategy is so fantastically huge. We are sociologists and psychologists here at Turning West. And so what we believe most is the most powerful part of strategic planning is the process itself. It's not just the final document you're going to hold in your hand, but on the next slide, we kind of talk about this process. Again, it's like playing chess. What we're trying to do is we're trying to align the brains of people in our thinking and our behavior. This is the magic that drives the outcome you're hoping to find, right? So this is something that you're really looking for, and how you involve the people in this process is so critical. So if you're just going to get your executive team off and sit in a hot tub in Fiji for a couple of days and come back with your strat plan, I will guarantee that is a failure. We've seen this time and time again, that when our clients have finished their process, they come back to us and said, you really delivered on what you said you're going to do. You got us talking to each other. And now we have, as Megan said earlier, a shared mental model of how we're going to succeed and win in our marketplace. That's the key, because as thinkers are doing more work on strategic planning, the conversation is shifting towards more of agility. Can we create an agile organization that can react, that can move, that can respond to a dynamic change in the environment? You know, there's political changes and changes in the economy and recessions and so forth. And can we be so aligned with our culture that we can shift with that? This is the key to the process of strategic planning. And that's where the game's going to be won or lost. So what we always encourage our clients or other people thinking about strategic planning to do is try to get as many people involved at some level as you possibly can, inside and outside the organization. People own plans that they themselves have had a hand in shaping. This is so crucial. So strategy and culture, next slide, please, Megan, are really key, and they need to be anchored to each other. So strategy needs to be anchored to your culture, but also we hope you'll see that your strategy is going to influence your culture, because culture is not static, it's changing all the time. And so as you evaluate your process of your strategic plan's implementation, you're again coming back to this thought of, how is this having an effect on the culture of this organization? Are we keeping in alignment, or are we moving outside of that, or are we misaligned? And if the values or the mission or the vision or the behaviors or the beliefs or the goals or the objectives are out of alignment with your culture, you're going to have a problem. So culture and strategy is all about mobilizing people. Any other thoughts about this, Megan, that you would add?
I'll just add that you can tell that we're really marrying these ideas of culture and strategy throughout, and hoping that you can see, while as you're planning for the future, whether it's a specific strategic plan or not, as you're going into a new year and you're assessing things, that you take away some of this, that culture really is the foundation of your strategy, of the direction that you're heading. It's going to either help you get there, or it's going to be a hurdle. And so having a healthy culture is the core of this, and checking in with your staff and creating processes to better understand what your culture is. As Dr. Goodwin said previously, your culture is not something you can just decide and create. It's something that already exists, and you can align it and shift it, but it's already there. And so we'd encourage you to take the time to really think through and try to assess what your culture is, especially if you're going into strategic planning in the future.
Yeah. We've got a few minutes for questions. If anyone wants to stick a question in the chat, we'd love to answer any questions you might have thinking about this. We know this is a really complex topic. And while you're thinking about what questions you might want to ask, let me tell you one final story. So one of my favorite stories of the last year or so, we did a very large strategic planning process. We won an award with one of the units of the city of Los Angeles. And we had to go do a public interview to get the award. And, it was really fascinating. One of the things we said to them was the process that we use is going to be what you're going to talk about at the end of this contract with us. Because what we're going to try to do, what we're going to succeed at doing, and we're very good at doing, is getting your program beneficiaries, talking to your staff, talking to your board, and having that conversation and aligning yourselves. And throughout the delivery that we guided them through, I was so proud when we got to the end and we had to present to the board at another public meeting, because this was a public agency. And the board chair looked at us and said, "You delivered on exactly what you said. I didn't believe it at the beginning, but believe it now. It was the conversations we had amongst ourselves and aligning ourselves and our mental models and our shared thinking has done something powerful for us that we would have never believed beforehand until we experienced it." And I was really proud, our team was really proud of this work, because they'd had 9 years of strategic plans before we'd seen all 3 previous strategic plans. And quite honestly, they were terrible. They were just awful. Remember this, Megan?
Mm-hmm.
And what we've heard now, it's been, I don't know, 9 months or so since we completed the plan. We've heard from them in continuous conversation, and they said, "This is really working. We turned a corner here. Something's happening to us that's different than what happened to us before." And that's the magic of anchoring culture and strategic planning in this really super powerful way. And that's what makes a difference. Any other thoughts about that, Megan?
I'll add that client that you mentioned and some others recently, really some of the key takeaway was also in that vision statement, as we talked about earlier, that a big shift was taking their vision statement as something they were just speaking to their employees internally, that we want to be excellent. While that is a message we want to send to our staff, the vision was shifted to something externally, like we want to serve our beneficiaries in this way and create a world that looks like this, and something that's much more inspirational. And that was really exciting to be a part of. And another piece to that specific client, I think it was fascinating that we argued that we needed to involve more staff in whether interviewing them, involving them in a task force, involving them in a survey in this process. And they came back at the end and really emphasized that, bringing people in, doing multiple retreats, adding additional retreats was really beneficial to the process of getting everyone together and, again, aligning culture through that process.
Yeah, that really reminds me to say that one of the processes and the principles of organization development, our field, is something we call the whole system in the room. That there's real value in having the whole system in the room. And sometimes executives miss this, that sometimes the best ideas we've heard from come from the receptionist, who sees everyone pass by his or her desk all day long. And sometimes they come from the most surprising places. In one recent process we did for the County of Los Angeles, it came from a brand new member who started, 8 days before the process began, and they involved her, and she had some remarkable contributions that were truly significant. And they could have said beforehand, "Well, she doesn't know us well enough to even be involved." We said, no. That newcomer perspective is really powerful, and it proved to be the case. As you think about your strategic planning, if you're about to enter this, we encourage you to consider these principles and these thoughts we've shared with you today. And if we can ever be of service to you, it would be our delight to be able to have that conversation with you about how that might work. Thank you very much for attending our webinar today, and we hope that if we can ever be of service, please call upon us. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.